Hey everybody, I'm gone today. I hope you guys are having a great day. So far at this point, I'm hoping that you guys took your quiz and that it went really well. And remember, you should have also turned in your politics worksheet. That was the one with the 9 questions on it. So make sure you turn that in today. We're going to do notes here for, I don't know, probably about 15 minutes. And then you're going to spend the rest of class watching the president videos and filling in notes on the next 2 presidents. There's no homework for the weekend. You can just enjoy and relax. So let's get into these notes. So pull out your notes sheet from yesterday. If you don't have one, raise your hand. Okay, the step can help you find one. I've got a couple of extras. Remember, today's notes that we're finishing up are called the Gilded Age, and we're talking about urbanization in daily life. They say 6-2, 6-3 at the top. And yesterday we were talking about how all these people moved to America, right, for a better life because new jobs were available. And because you had all these people moving to America at the same time, you had overcrowding, not enough transportation, a lot of pollution issues. Hey folks, I'm sorry about that. I forgot about the minute music. So anyway, we were talking about how there are all these problems in the cities because of urbanization, because of the growth of cities. And one of the problems that existed in cities that was pretty common during the Gilded Age was fires. They were first coming out with fire hoses, fire extinguishers, fire escapes, fire drills. And so fires were pretty common, especially because, cities lacked fresh water supplies, fire departments that were close by homes, and most homes were out of wood. So let's look down at your notes. I think we left down at the Great Chicago Fire. So look down at number 6 on your notes under part 1, find the Great Chicago Fire part, and let's write down cause and effect. So for the cause of the Great Chicago Fire, you're going to write down the cause was carelessness and drought. So you're writing down on your sheet the causes of the Great Chicago Fire, and you're writing down carelessness and drought. Now, you might have heard the myth of the Great Chicago Fire, which is that Mrs. O'Leary's cow knocked over a lantern in the barn, and the barn caught fire. We think that story is perhaps cute, but it's just a myth. In all reality, we think that someone was most likely smoking, disposed of their cigarette, and as they disposed of their cigarette, it caught fire, and we think that it caught fire near wooded areas, and it was very dry. It had been for several weeks. They had gone without rain like we currently are, and so kind of woods caught fire, and then it got into homes, and then it spread quickly. Part of the reason it spread quickly was because homes were far apart. People often hung their laundry between houses, and so it went from one house to the next very quickly. Now let's talk about effects. So look at your sheet for effects. For effects, pick anything from the list there. You could write down something like almost 18,000 buildings were destroyed, or $200 million occurred in property damage, or 100,000 people were left homeless. This fire raged for 24 hours. It destroyed so much of Chicago, and it was devastating to people because most people did not have insurance back then. On the bright side, because this fire occurred at the beginning of the Gilded Age, they got to reimagine the city and rebuild it. They're going to put in fire departments, police stations, parks, sewage systems, and the elevated train with some more modern transportation. Unfortunately, it also made it possible for some robber barons to buy up land very quickly because people had lost their homes in the fire. And then they're going to be building more factories or skyscrapers and really getting rich off of others' misfortune. So make sure you wrote down something for effects there as well. All right, let's move on to the next part here. So in part 2, we're going to be filling in the values and the daily life of Americans during the Gilded Age. And this goes along with chapter 6, section 3. And we see some competing values here, meaning that there's different points of view, and we're going to go over them kind of in tandem or together. So we've got individualism versus naturalism. So the first one to talk about here is individualism. Individualism is the belief that anybody can achieve success. So you're going to write something down about for individualism. Look at your notes page. That's number 1. Anyone can achieve success. This is the idea of the American dream. It's the reason why so many immigrants came to America. They came for a better life, for political and religious freedom and new jobs. They think anything is within their grasp if they work hard enough. Now, the opposing viewpoint during this time period is that failure can be out of your control. Excuse me. Some people really believed during this time period that failure was just completely and totally out of their control, and it was nothing that they could do to achieve success. And you might say, why would someone think that? Now, part of the reason why some people believed that failure was out of your control as part of this naturalism is because they were born into poverty, and then they work in a factory where their boss makes all the money and they get passed over for a raise, and they just don't seem like they're ever really getting anywhere. So they're often criticizing capitalism and America and what's happening in our society. Maybe they're supporting communism even. Maybe they want to go to a more simplistic life and just go live in a cabin in the woods and hunt and fish and provide their own food for their family. Some writers like Jack London and Stephen Crane kind of support this view. So naturalism makes you write something down about how people feel like failure is out of their control. They're just going to fail because society has kind of created a society where rich have power and the rest of us don't. Now, the next two values also go together. You've got some people who are social Darwinists and some people who believe in gospel of wealth. And yes, there's a typo on your sheet for social Darwinism. I'm sorry. So it shouldn't be socialism Darwinism. It should just be social Darwinism. So looking at your sheet for number 3, you're going to fill in that social Darwinism is survival of the fittest. And we've talked about this one before. Remember, this is Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, and now it's being applied instead of to animals and species. They're applying it to people and money and wealth and status. So social Darwinism is an excuse. It's a viewpoint that the rich, the robber barons would hold. And they would say, well, aw, you're starving? So sad. I guess it's evolution. You're just meant to starve. It became an excuse to not pay your employees more because they said it was just part of the natural selection process of life to weed out the survivors from the people who weren't going to make it. And that's pretty sad. Next up, we've got the gospel of wealth. The gospel of wealth, remember, is the opposite viewpoint. It believes that you should help the poor. So social Darwinism, don't help the poor. Let them die. Survival of the fittest. Gospel of wealth, you should help the poor. So write something down on your sheet for gospel of wealth for number 4 about how people believed it was the duty of the rich to help the poor. Andrew Carnegie, we've mentioned him before, and this gospel of wealth idea. Remember, he was a big supporter of this. He said the right thing to do, the Christian thing to do, was if you have the money, you should help the poor. And you're going to help the poor help themselves. They're not passing out $20 bills. They're going to use that money to give out scholarship funds, give people free textbooks who can't afford them, to build schools, hospitals, libraries, art centers. So hopefully you're starting to see so far these competing views, right? Individualism, where anybody can achieve success. Where naturalism, no, if you fail, it's not your fault, it's the government's. Social Darwinism, right? Saying that only, the wealthy really survive. And if you don't make it, oh well, it's nobody's fault but your own. And then gospel of wealth says, no, you should help these poor people who are born into poverty. They can't really help themselves. Now, the next thing we have to talk about here is social gospel and settlement houses. Now, you're probably going to want to put a star or a circle on your paper next to gospel of wealth and social gospel. Looking ahead to next week, you're going to have your test next Thursday. Next Wednesday, you're going to have review questions due. Next Thursday is going to be your test. Next Friday, we're going to have another choice board where you choose to make a meme or political cartoon or something about the Gilded Age or journal entry or something. And on next week's test, many of you are probably going to struggle with gospel of wealth versus social gospel. So let's talk about the differences because those terms sound very similar. Social gospel is the idea that problems exist in our society because rich people abuse poor people. So gospel of wealth says it's kind of like a nice thing. It's like, oh, gospel of wealth. The rich people should help the poor. It's the right thing to do, the moral, the Christian thing. But social gospel is more angry. And it's like, we have problems in society because rich people abuse poor people. And so it's probably a viewpoint that an employee would hold. So maybe a rich captain of industry might support gospel of wealth, But an actual employee in a factory would probably support social gospel, where they're angry at their boss for being rich and abusing kind of the employees. They're angry about the fact they don't make any money. Now, social gospel does get a lot of supporters, people who are in the middle class, and so they're going to go on to create organizations to help the poor, like the Salvation Army, which collects clothes, the YMCA, which has free daycare, soup kitchens, and they're also going to create settlement houses. Now, off to the side of your paper, make sure you write down something about a settlement house. A settlement house is a home where people go to basically get certain services if they're poor. And it could be that they're an immigrant, it might not be. So write something down about how a settlement house is an organization created as part of this social gospel to help the poor, maybe to learn English, to learn a new skill, to get babysitting, to get medical care. So a settlement house is going to help the poor and immigrants get medical care, get an education, help them learn a new skill, get babysitting, something like that. Now, sorry about that, guys. I got distracted. Somebody popped in my room all of a sudden. So just make sure you're clear that the settlement house movement would help immigrants and help the poor by providing them with skills. And make sure you write down Jane Addams' name. She's important. There's not a lot of famous women during this time period, and she's famous because she runs this settlement house. And one of the most famous settlement houses is in Chicago called Hull House. And she actually goes on to get a Nobel Peace Prize. So make sure you write down something, Jane Addams, Hull House, helps the poor kind of get a better life. Now let's move into this last part. And this last part, we're going to look at daily life. And we're going to look at entertainment. And there's not much to write down here. For entertainment, write down amusement parks. So the middle class and the rich start to go to amusement parks. At amusement parks, they're going to start to come out with roller coasters like you see in the picture, the old wooden ones. They're going to start to have Ferris wheels. They're going to have the World's Fair with science exhibits and food and crafts and clothing and things to buy. And the poor would really have to save up their money to be able to go to entertainment like this. Now for sports, you're going to write down that people start watching professional baseball and football. So people start watching professional baseball and football. Obviously, it's all live at this time. You have to actually go see a game. Usually, it's just on a local level. Eventually, they're going to organize it into, your actual true professional teams that you see today. And this is going to be something, yet again, that the middle class goes to watch professional baseball or football or plays it in their spare time. The rich in particular, they tend to watch baseball and football, but they also have a lot more leisure time. So maybe they take lessons and they learn to play tennis or golf or basketball as well as baseball and football. And usually the middle class and the wealthy often go bike riding as well as a new transportation method and save up their money to buy a bike. At first it was taboo. Girls were not allowed to ride bikes, but then the stigma against a woman riding a bike changed. The poor don't have a lot of time to engage in sports or even to watch sports. All right, so now let's move on to art. For art, you're going to write something down about how people would go ahead and they would buy Kodak cameras. Kodak cameras, right? They would take pictures. It's photojournalism. If you've ever taken a picture with your phone, you're into photojournalism as well. That means you just want to document your life. So write something down for art about how people would take pictures with Kodak's cameras. At first, cameras were really expensive, but now through mass production, they're starting to become more affordable and people want to document their life in this era. Now, finishing up art, people are also into the realist movement. So you're going to write down for art that people subscribe to realism. That means that they paint or draw pictures trying to make them look as realistic as possible because a lot of people don't have the money to travel. They've never seen, animals. They've never traveled the globe and gone to other countries, and this is their only way that they can really see the world is through these pictures and paintings, which are done very realistically. Now, moving on to literature. So looking at your note page, you should be on number 4 here. Make sure you're following along. We're almost done. For literature, this is also realism. Writers were trying to show what life was really like. And make sure you write down Mark Twain for literature. He's obviously one of the most famous authors of this time period. He writes Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, talking about how immigrants came to America and it wasn't everything that they thought it was going to be. And he also writes Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, one of those books that today is on the banned book list because people think that it shouldn't say certain words, but he was trying to make it very realistic during that time period. So make sure you write down Mark Twain.